Hey, Tom here, and if you didn't know me, I am a miniature sculptor who's been sculpting professionally for over 20 years. I've sculpted for some of the biggest companies in the industry, such as Reaper Miniatures and WizKids, as well as many others that I'm sure you've heard of. In this episode, I'm going to answer some questions submitted by you while I take you behind the scenes and show you what I've been working on these past few months. Which brings me to an announcement. I want to let everybody know that I'm going to be at Adepticon 2024 this year. As always, love that convention. It's a great show. But this year is extra special because this year I will be bringing a fully realized demo of my new miniatures game that I will be hopefully releasing later this year, the Goblin Menace. I won't be formally exhibiting this year, so you'll have to look for me out in the open play area. I'll be doing this totally guerrilla style where I'll be setting up the game and letting everybody know where I'll be and asking you and hoping that you come and find me to try out the game. I'll be giving away some free miniatures, and I would love if you would come visit just to talk about sculpting and especially for you to have the chance to try the Goblin Menace. Before we dive in, I want to remind you that if you're looking to up your miniature sculpting game, you can download my ultimate quick start guide to sculpting minis down in the link in the description below. The first thing I did when I decided that I was going to demo the Goblin Menace at Adepticon was to make a list of everything that I had to do. And at the top of the list was paint the miniatures for the demo. I wanted to make sure that each of the four teams would be distinct, have a distinct look, and they would stand out on the table from one another. Alright, let's get started with the first question. Skeleton Head Toys 4629 says, I think it would be very useful to hear about how you manage your time and how you accomplish goals with a more limited time frame. Great question, Isaac. Well, I've had to tackle it different ways over the years. I want to start by saying and letting everybody know that I do have a full-time job. I don't sculpt miniatures full-time despite having done this for quite a few years. So time management is super important in order to get anything done. It's not always easy, and I definitely struggle. I was struggling before I really decided strongly that I was going to do everything, get everything going for this demo at Adepticon. In the end, there's a few things that I do. I like to plan ahead of time, and I will do sometimes a little too much planning, but I like to make lists. I like to really try and think through the larger dynamic of what I'm trying to do and start to break things down from there. Another big thing that I do is I try and get up early in the morning and do some of the work then. A lot of times I'm pretty worn out from the day and may not always feel like getting into it, sculpting or painting or modeling things up. And so that's a great way to help kickstart things and ensure that you get something done for the day. Another thing I do is I try and just do a little bit every day. And again, I don't always succeed at this. And in fact, there will be these stints where I'm just not doing anything. I just can't bring myself to it. But I have found that if I can get myself to do just a little every day, even like painting these miniatures, it is a huge help in tackling what needs to be done and gives me a lot less pressure. One last tip I'll give is it is really helpful to have some kind of deadline or milestone that you're trying to hit. For me, with Goblin Menace, I had been noodling with it for quite some time earlier last year, but what really turned the corner for me was when I decided to go visit my new best friend Matt. I had to really buckle down to work out some of the kinks for the game ahead of showing it to another person. Up until that point, I had just done some internal playtesting with myself and my kids, but I wanted to have some of those issues we discovered worked out so that it could be a lot more of a productive playtest. This next question comes from Sweeney Todd. How do you compete with the digital sculpting push in the industry using physical modeling techniques? The answer to this question really depends on what you're trying to do. If you are trying to be a freelance sculptor with a number of miniature companies, some of the larger ones and even a lot of the smaller ones, more and more people are preferring to receive digital sculpts. There's several advantages, but I think more than anything, people are just getting used to getting it that way because a lot of newer sculptors aren't coming into the industry using and sculpting traditionally. There are some hurdles to overcome by sculpting traditionally over digital, and that is, you have to send the physical piece in. You can't sell your physical sculpture as a STL file, unless of course you go through some digital scanning, which that is becoming more and more, or 3D scanning, that's becoming more viable these days. So there are still some options there. In the end, if you are making a great figure, it doesn't matter how you've sculpted it. If people see your work and see your talent, or you're doing it all on your own for yourself, it's just another medium to choose from. And if this is why I always encourage people, and why I've always enjoyed doing my own work, because you can sculpt it and create it any way you want. Question 3 comes from Doug's9915. How did you approach manufacturers about your sculptures in the beginning? Was it you introduced them a figure via email or two, or was it a sit down in the office? Well, Doug's, it was a little bit of both. When I first started out, I got into sculpting, got my first commissions by utilizing an old Yahoo group. It wasn't old at the time, it's what everybody was using because there was no Facebook groups or anything like that. It was called the One List Sculpting Group, and there was a lot of professional sculptors on there, and it started to become the place where people looked for sculptors for work, as well as learned how to sculpt. So I was on there, and I got very fortunate early on to get work from 2 different gentlemen, and that really started me on my sculpting career. I looked in other places as well, but I didn't send my pieces out to a bunch of different companies. It was more directly reaching out when those people were posting and looking for work on that site. Now, once I got settled on with that and things progressed, I started to get face-to-face with other manufacturers. It actually all started at Gen Con, and it was actually very similar to how I started by going to the Yahoo group, the One List Sculpting group. I didn't go up to booths to different companies to meet their art directors and things like that. I brought a portfolio to Gen Con. The first year was in Indianapolis, but I was so nervous I never got up the courage to talk to anybody or present my work. But what I did do is I went to the sculpting hangout. I can't remember what it was actually called, but it was something that Sandra Garrity ran, sponsored by Reaper and some other folks throughout the years. And once again, it was a place that had all these professional sculptors that I could meet and talk and learn from, and it also had businesses there that worked with these sculptors. Now, I didn't get any work out of that first encounter, but what it did is in future years, when I would continue to go to that sculptors gathering, I got the chance to meet 2 pivotal people in my life, which was Chris Clark of Magnificent Egos, and then Reaper Ron from Reaper Miniatures, which Chris Clark introduced me to. And once I started working with both of those guys, it opened up so many doors, and frankly, it was a dream come true. Reaper was always a miniature line I grew up looking at in the stores and just poring over other sculptors' work, and I was elated to be able to actually have my work on the same shelves with these other amazing artists. Andrew Goldstein 1029 asks, if you wanted to carve or add detail to the other side, how would you do that without damaging the detail you've already put on the front? So this question is in regards to the Sculpting Shields video that I did. You can check it out in this link. So when I sculpt shields, I use putty. So the way I keep from losing the detail on that is I sculpt one side with the putty, I let it cure, and then I pop the shield off, stick it down again, and I sculpt the other side with putty, and then let that cure. It's very tricky to do two-sided sculpting when the thing isn't freestanding like a shield without using putty. If you use clay, it is very challenging to be able to not damage the detail. Thank you so much for all these great questions. I still have several more, but if you have a question, feel free to put it down in the comments and I will add it to a future video. But before I go, let me introduce you to the 4 goblin tribes that will be featured in the Goblin Menace demo. First, we have the Lettuce Lunks, followed by the Carrot Clan, then the Grape Gang, and lastly, the Blueberry Bunch. Or maybe Blueberry Bandits. That's what my daughter likes to call them. Until next time, keep sculpting, and I hope to see you at Adepticon.